I just
Hello.
forgot to add myself to the
Yeah, I was
screen.
like, oh, I'm all alone today.
Okay, make sure we're live. Make sure I've hit all the right buttons.
It looks that good. It looks good.
Great. Good morning and welcome to Living Waters, falling deeper in love with God's Word. I am one of your hosts, Lauren Cruz.
And I'm Stephanie Pavlantos.
Thanks for joining us today. And I can see that we've got a few people joining us live as well. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
So we are doing something a little different today. We have completed both Stephanie's book, Jewels of Hebrews, and we have just finished my
Oh,
book.
I'm going to take off my robe. Look at me. I still have my robe on because I was cold. Sorry. Let me take off my robe.
That'll look a little more professional.
Yes. I was so freezing this morning.
That looks great on you, by the way. That looks very good. We've just also recently finished my book, Strength of a Woman, Why You Are Proverbs 31. And so we are going to take a little bit of a break today. And we've done this one other time, but we're going to go over a few more books that we enjoy using and things that we've learned from. And we're just going to talk about a couple of books we have. So Thanks for joining us today. And
thank you. So we missed you last week.
How'd that go? I did actually. I followed up and I listened in. So
did you?
I did. I thought it was pretty good.
Well, good. Phil was great.
I listened to the replay. Dr. Phil.
Dr. Phil. So, and we're looking forward to having some other guests on in the future. So we have, So before we start maybe another book, which we think we know what we're going to start, right?
Right.
So,
I think we've got a couple of folks. Terry Murphy is an author who has written about the tabernacle, and we've been trying to get her on the show. So at some point we will have her. And we've even talked about doing a book study, perhaps her book, or just kind of pulling different things together and doing a study on the tabernacle. So I know we've talked about that. I'll share this a little bit later. This is one of the books I've picked, and Julie Zine Coleman is the author. And I was able to reconnect with her. I was at the National Religious Broadcasters Convention last Tuesday, and had a great time. Lots of good networking and lots of good contacts. But I was able to work with Julie. I helped her with a book signing that she did. So she and I were able.
Books.
Yeah. So she and I were able to connect a little bit and talk more about her book. I'll share about it. And so hopefully we'd like to get Julie on the show as well. So
yes. So we have lots of things planned for the summer. And we talked about the Christ Key, which I'll put that in the comments, by Chad Bird. And that would, if you are interested in getting that and following along with us, it's an 8-chapter book, so it'll be an 8-week study. But I think it'll be really good to do on here. And if you don't know who Chad Bird is, he's a Old Testament scholar. So very
good stuff.
Knows a lot about the Hebrew language. I believe he speaks Hebrew, but he just knows a lot about it, and he's very interesting. But you can find him on Facebook, and you can find him on TikTok, I believe, or something. He does little shorts, and it shows up on Instagram Reels. But
he also has and I believe 2 other ministers from his church. They do 40 Minutes in the Bible. It's a podcast.
Yeah.
I mean, there's over 100 shows that they've recorded. And I mean, I literally went back and started at number 1, and he's working through giving us some just great information on Genesis. I mean, like, we haven't even left Genesis yet. So great information. I very much have enjoyed that as well. So there's lots of opportunities to connect with him as well.
I saw him in Cleveland. He was here one weekend, and I had the chance to go listen to him, and he was excellent. So I bought his book there at the event, and so that was what he spoke on the whole time he was there.
That's
great. It was very good.
That's great.
All right.
So you want to go first? You want to talk about one of the books that you have selected?
Okay, so here we go.
I'll try to post on Facebook. We should post on our Facebook pages the stack that we've discussed.
Yeah, we can probably even, well, mine, if I put it here, it'll post on my Facebook page.
Okay, great.
But here's the first one, and this one's a little one, and it's the easy one, but it's 40 days of Hebrew devotionals. So in it takes a word, and I just happened to get Armageddon here, and so this is day 21. So he gives you a scripture in which this word is used, which is obviously Revelation. Then he tells you where the original in Greek and Hebrew, and you see that that's all there is for that. Those 2 pages is all that it is. Oh, I'm sorry, I had the wrong page, but it's not long. It's basically about that length each devotional. So here's the other one, and that includes a prayer. So that was page 1 and page 2, and then of course there's about the Torah. And just different words like that. And he gives the Hebrew or the Greek spelling of those as well. And so it's very interesting. It's really easy just to do every morning. I would read this along with my Bible or another devotional because I liked picking out those Hebrew words in scripture and understanding better. So that was my first one.
That's good. So, my first one is In His Own Words by Grant Lutton, or I don't know if he pronounces it Luton or Lutton.
Luton, yeah.
So it's a pretty thick book. This is one of my favorite books, and I have kept this as a reference, and I've even quoted him in my upcoming book. This is probably one of the best books I have ever read on the Hebrew alphabet, and so it goes through just everything. I mean, this is packed. There's so much stuff. And the reason I like it is, so I've read a lot of Jewish books on the Hebrew alphabet and, rabbi information. And so that's important because the Jews look at the Hebrew alphabet. It's important to understand how they're approaching it. But he is a Christian. And so he definitely is giving us the Christian perspective of how Messiah, it says Messianic Insights into the Hebrew Alphabet is the subtitling. And so everything that he shows in here, not just Old Testament information, not just cultural information, not just Jewish information, but he also includes sections of how that letter is important to Messianic prophecy and the links to New Testament and fulfillment through Messiah. And so I loved it. So here's an example of some of the extra. I mean, there's so much in here. There's just, I literally, when I was reading it, I would have to read like one chapter a day and then just stop and kind of ponder and think and go through it. Yeah. Like I couldn't just sit and read a whole bunch. I had to literally do one a day. So here's something extra that I just thought was awesome. So we're talking about the letter Aleph. And he has a section in here called What's in a Name? And what he does is he goes through the various names of God, and he does include some gematria. So like the word Yahweh, if you were to take the numeric, because in Hebrew, every letter is also a number, and it has a numeric value. They don't have a numbering system like we do. They just use the letters. And so if you were to take the name Yahweh, and you were to add up the Y, W, hey, Y, Yud, hey, Vav, hey. If you were to add that up, you would get to the value of 26. And so the name Yahweh has the value of 26. And then if you were to start at, and this is it. So a lot of people don't like this method because there's various translations of Hebrew. But if you were to take just the Hebrew scriptures in just standard Hebrew, not all these different translations of the Hebrew, but if you were to start at the bet or the bait that begins the alphabet and count out 26 spots, you would land on a letter Aleph. And then if you were to do that with Yah and Yehovah, El, Elohim, and Ab, which is Father, if you were to add up the value of all of those names and count out from the beginning, you would land on an Aleph. And so he's using this as a way to help us understand how the Jews often look at a letter
Mm-hmm.
and that whole meaning is packed into a letter. So Aleph is an ox, it's strength and it's service and it's sacrifice, but it's also a letter that often represents God. And perhaps, just perhaps, one of the reasons is because when you count out the various names of God, you land on an Aleph at the beginning.
And that's so cool because and it's you realize that it can't be an accident.
Right.
You know, this was definitely planned this way and written this way. But I read where the word Aleph or whatever means wondrous.
Yeah, you've mentioned that before.
Yeah, so that's really cool because when you think of the times that wonderful is used or something in scripture and who it's talking about. So it's really cool.
Yeah, I've got one other really something that I love from this book too. He gave us, so I truly believe that Hebrew is just the language of God. And when you write, when the Bible was written and the way it was pieced together, I just don't think there's coincidences. You know, and for example, Noah's name backwards is grace, and that whole story is nothing about the grace of God, you know, and so there's so much in there. Well, he gives this amazing example of, he takes the story of Moses and Aaron and Nun, and my brain just left. Who are the two? Her. Oh. Where Moses is, they're fighting in the valley and they're fighting the Amorites, I believe. I'm not 100% on that one. And Moses has to keep his hands in the air. So Aaron is on one side holding up his arms, and Hur is on the other side holding up his arms. And so and even Chad would agree that everything in the Old Testament should point us to Jesus, and because Jesus said, starting with the scriptures, he taught us. And so if you were to look at that passage, and it talks about the salvation of God and our dependence on God, but if you were to take the names of Hur, Moses, and Aaron, and you read them backwards, you would actually get, one is Hashem, which is the name, which generally represents God. One is spelled backward is the door, and so the door of light, which would represent Jesus, because we know Jesus says the door, Yeshua. And then the other is Ruach, which is the Spirit. So, you know, just reading. So you've got the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit in the three, and those are the three with the hands up. But then he makes a mention that if you had any doubt, the one that was fighting on the battlefield was Joshua. He was the one that was in the thick of the battle, and we all know that Joshua is the name Yeshua. As well. And so he just adds extras like that. And I love that stuff because to me, it just more and more proof that this Bible that we read is just not full of stories and coincidences. I mean, if you didn't believe it front ways, you can read it backwards and still get the same message of salvation and grace.
Yeah.
So
and Grant Luton resides up here in Cleveland, where I am.
I didn't know that.
And I've been to his church. So
are you kidding me?
Yeah. So he's a nice guy. Very nice
that's
guy.
Great. That's great.
So I've gotten to talk to him about different things. And I remember one of the things he told me once. I was like, okay, so every time I go to a writer's conference or anywhere, and I start writing about the things of Hebrew and the number system, whatever, the pictographs and all that, I said, I'm always challenged by a pastor or, something. And he just looked at me, he goes, and because it's not taught in seminary, then it can't be right. And I go, oh, okay.
Yeah. And I did go to seminary, and I took 2 semesters of Greek and 2 semesters of Hebrew. Never once did we discuss pictograph. We just talked about grammar. That's all. That's really all they talk. So that when you're reading things, you can begin to piece together the context. But never even talked about numeric numbers.
I know.
A book on that later. I mean, I'm just saying, the deeper you get into these aspects, it's not a code. It's not a secret. It's not
pagan.
Special revelation. It's
right.
not pagan. It's just ways that you can dig a little deeper and experience the message that God has us on a different level. So,
and even when you find two words with the same numeric value, that means they're connected in some way.
Right. Yeah. So anyway, go if you are interested in just learning a little bit more about the Hebrew alphabet and just other amazing just coincidences that you just can't explain, but God. Take a look at this book. I highly recommend it. Yeah.
And I'm putting all the links to those books.
Perfect.
So they'll show up on Lauren's Facebook page, mine, and Lamb Network, as well as my YouTube. So they'll show up. And so we ready for the next one?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so this book is pretty new, like recent. This book is where the Lord started speaking to me about my podcast. And so there's a lot of reasons why it's kind of special, but it's Jen Rosner, Finding Messiah, A Journey into the Jewishness of the Gospel.
I've read that.
And I actually got to talk to her a little bit. I've wanted her on my podcast, but haven't gotten to she hasn't had the opportunity yet. But she is an associate professor at Fuller Theological Seminary. And she's also part of it's not on her book, but I think it's King's University or King's College. But she also teaches online there, which is if you want to go to a school that teaches everything Messianic, then that's a school to go to. Everything Hebrew and Messianic is there. I have a good friend who had her as her professor, and I was so jealous. Yeah. And but in here she does such an excellent job at helping you understand Paul, because I think he is one of the most misunderstood writers, because I even heard people say, well, Paul gave up his Judaism. He he's a Christian. It's like, no. That's why Paul tells you he was, gives you his lineage, his genealogy, because he was very much a Jew and very proud of it. But I never understood Paul, because it was really hard to understand him from a Christian perspective, trying to understand a Jewish man and that well. But anyway, she goes into some of the things about Paul, but interwoven in all of the biblical stuff is her own personal story. And it really made me realize, because there's one, if I find it here, she actually has a chapter called Loss in Translation. And then she has a chapter called The Excluded Middle. And she calls it the excluded middle because that's where most Messianics are. They're not Christians and they're not Jews. They're somewhere in between them. And they call them the excluded middle because a lot of Christian churches don't include the Messianic Jewish people. And then, of course, the synagogues don't include them at all and don't even consider them Jews. And for the longest time, this particular woman, author, she wouldn't tell anybody she was Jewish. She only told them she was a Christian, because she didn't know what to do with her Jewish self and her Jewish identity. So she just describes herself as a follower of Jesus who was raised in a Jewish home and who continues to live a Jewish life. She takes you on a personal and corporate journey into the Jewish roots of the Christian faith. So great book, but she talks about being grafted in and what that means, and the different fruit on the tree that they raised for fruit. The what do they call those? Not the olive tree, but the one they used to bear fruit. And then you had the wild ones. So there was a difference between like the grown ones and the wild ones. So just lots and lots of good information. And she just seems like such a nice person too. I've seen interviews with her.
Yeah. I've read that book as well. And what I really walked away with too is kind of a little bit better understanding as a Christian how to approach my
Yes.
Messianic friends that were truly Jewish, because you don't really think about it. You think, oh, well, they love Yeshua, and so we're jumping right in. But
right.
There's a discrimination even for them between the church and the synagogue, and really it gave me a better understanding of just a softness and just a welcoming spirit, and to just encourage them, like, don't give up your Jewishness,
Right.
and don't. My daughter is dating a Jewish young man, and he knows she's a Christian, and we kind of tease and joke about it. But, we've had that conversation. Like, if you're serious with this guy, invite him to a Messianic church. Don't drag him to your Baptist church, that you grew up in. Take him to a Messianic church, because even though we're speaking about Yeshua, he's going to be more comfortable there, because they're doing things and speaking things and reading the parts of the Bible that he's very much familiar with. So,
and don't tell them that they have to be a Christian.
Don't change them. Yeah, don't change them.
No,
Yeah.
Jesus was a Jew. It's okay that they remain Jewish, because that's who they are, and that's and so and actually we can learn a lot, as we know, as we talked about here, from them. So it's boy, I mean, I think it's incredible that they're coming to know Yeshua, but what they can teach the church and what they can teach us as believers in Jesus as well is amazing, fascinating. So
well, I'm gonna kind of go piggyback on your ideas about Paul, and I guess I'll go ahead and talk about this one at the time now. So this book is On Purpose by Julie Zine Coleman. It's understanding God's freedom for women through Scripture, and she, I think it's one of the best books that I've read on women leadership in the church and our position in the church, because she definitely goes through those hot topic verses, and the verses that are often A, misunderstood, B, taken out of context, C, they're one or two verses in the entire canon of the Bible, yet doctrine is built on them. And so sometimes we struggle with them, but what she does is she has 10 chapters, and she focuses on one chapter, the 10 chapters per, or one chapter per, I can't even talk, one verse per chapter. And so she's covering 10 verses that are a little controversial. She goes everything from hierarchy in marriage, and gifts of the Spirit, and are we really second-class citizens? Are men only the authority? Teaching, should women be allowed to teach? Does God even approve of women in leadership? That's not even necessarily teaching, but just leadership in the church. And then a scriptural definition of godly womanhood. I mean, she talks about Titus, Peter, Ephesians. And so, but what she does is she has spent a lot of time researching the cities, right? Because these letters in the New Testament were written to churches in cities. And so she would research the cult. She did deep dives into the culture of those areas, the grammar structure of every verse, the words. She does word studies. She looks at where these words are used in other places in the Bible, and does a deep dive comparison of, like, why suddenly now does this word mean this when previously it meant this. So I really enjoyed her book. It's an award-winning book. I think she won the Golden Scroll for 2021, I believe. I can't remember what year, but it's a very good reference, and I've actually hung on to it because I very much appreciate her research, and I am that nerd that looks at the footnotes and then looks up the research. Right. And so I very much appreciate, she is a seminary graduate. She is in a denomination that does allow female pastors. And so they're, if you look at it in that aspect, you might think, well, she's got a bias to consider that. But I think this is a very unbiased look. It's just a scholarly deep dive into.
But she also talks about growing up in a denomination that even wouldn't let her ask a question.
Right. Yeah, and
wasn't allowed to ask a question in a Bible study being taught by a male.
Right.
So she had to write it down on a piece of paper, and her husband had to ask a question for her. I mean, that is, to me, that's unbelievable.
Right.
Really,
And she's very good about, every chapter has some kind of story. It's like, so it sounds very academic, but like me, she was probably told you have to have stories. So she, put examples of people that struggled with the issues in that particular verse. And, I just thought it was a very good book. I very much respect her scholarly research. She is a seminary graduate. She is, a very intelligent person who's done just a phenomenal job on writing that book. So, yeah.
So, I met her last year at Blue Ridge.
Yeah. Yeah. I was able to spend some time with her at NRB. She's an awesome member, and so am I. And so we both each had opportunity to do a book signing, and she gave out over, I think she texted me later and said it was like 65 books or something. So she was able to get that information out. Yeah. So good book. Highly recommend it. Read through it. Check the research. I think you'll be happy.
Okay.
All right.
So my next one is Lost in Translation. So this is by John Klein and Adam Spears, and they are Messianic believers. And this was interesting because they use the menorah, much like the creation gospel.
Right.
And see if I can find the picture here. But they show you how, because there's 7 candles on the menorah. And of course, I won't be able to find it because I actually want to, but there's several pictures in here of that, but maybe I have the wrong, because there's 3 volumes of this book.
I was just going to say, there's more to that book.
Yeah. So even if you just read the first one, you still learn a whole lot.
I think I've only read the first one.
Okay. So I read all 3 of them, and the third one gets the half of the second and into the third get into Revelation. So they're showing you like the 7 churches, the 7 trumpets, the 7 bowls, the 7 plagues, all those different things, how they all line up, the 7 feasts.
Yeah.
They put them all on this menorah, which they have drawn out inside.
Right. Which I will say, I mean, that is something that Creation Gospel goes over. And until you've really looked at the Bible in that way, through that lens, you just don't realize how much creation relates to the rest of the Bible, just the patterns that God follows, and, nothing new is under the sun. And, he is a God of repetition and planning and organization, and books like that definitely, just really reveal how truly he is, how true he does stay to the patterns. Yeah.
And I'm not even saying that, you have to believe every, maybe some of this stuff won't necessarily sit with things you've been taught.
Right.
But I thought that chapter 4, Devils and Demons, was a really good chapter, because it really explained where demons came from, and that they weren't created, and they're not fallen out angels.
Right.
But all devils are fallen angels. That's how she explained, or they explain it, that all devils are all the fallen angels, but because they're all accusers. That's the Hebrew name that was given. They're no longer called an angel, but in a sense, but they are fallen angels. So they still have the power and the glory and the magnificence of these beautiful angels. But the demons are the ones who are the offspring, and that have become grotesque and all of that. So when you think of an evil, awful, yucky looking spirit, that's a demon. But if you think of the devils, they're still angels, because even that's why Satan can masquerade as an angel of light, because he's still a beautiful being. He was created.
And you say that, and it makes me think, 'cause I've been doing a lot of deep diving into Revelation lately. And you say that, and think about how we have been so fooled as a church and as a people parent, things that we've allowed, and it's not because they were grotesque, right? They were appealing and lovely and seem to be good for us, like we're setting up traditions and we're doing things that are great for our family, but Satan's not going to come at us with the grotesque, right? He's gonna give us things that are going to be enticing to us. And so I think that's a good point that you made.
Yeah. And then the other chapter that was good is called Myth versus Truth. So he takes things they do, and they even talk about idioms and things like even where you might have in the New Testament, you might have church, but then the word church mentioned, but then in Revelation you have the synagogue of Satan. And so how it puts synagogue in a bad light, when actually a lot of translations have used where synagogue may have been used, they replaced it with church. So it's stuff like that.
By the way, did you know synagogue of Satan was the reference to the Shammai?
Yes. I did know that. That's so good, isn't it? It's so interesting because when you understand who the synagogue of Satan is, it was actually a group of Pharisees. And so, but they have some stuff like this, some all sorts of tables and all sorts of things. But he talks about mythology. They talk about the book of Enoch and how the reason it's not in our Bible. And that was actually certain denominations felt like it was the normal person wouldn't understand Enoch. So they didn't want it in there. And then there's a whole chapter on the menorah. So, but those are just some of the chapters, but it was, and this was my favorite chapter, was betrothal. So he takes the whole story of the betrothal and brings in the scriptures that you like, even behold, I stand at the door and knock in Revelation 3:20. And he takes it and says, this is the beginning of a betrothal, because the bridegroom would come to a woman's house and say, and he would stand at the door and he would knock and he'd be with his father. And if the woman opened the door and said, come in, then they would have dinner together with all their families and with witnesses and start the betrothal process. But if she didn't open the door, they walked away. They left. So it all started with stand at the door and knock. And that's the very verse that Jesus gives. So lots and lots of good information in here that helps you understand Revelation, but also helps you to understand all these other different topics. So
that's a good one. Good job. That's a good one to hang on to as well. Keep that one.
It's one to go back and look at.
I have a hard time getting rid of books.
Me too.
I guess I'll talk about this one. We've talked about this before. We've had him on as a guest before.
Oh, yes.
This is Rabbi Darrell Weinberg. And this is his book, Red Mark on God's Forehead, explaining the way of God and more accurately his people. And Stephanie kind of referenced it just a little bit in the previous book, and that's why I went ahead and pulled it out. He goes through everything in the church. He goes through traditions, even discussing birthdays, like where did it come, like we say make a wish and blow out your candle and we don't think anything of it, but he's like, you're making a wish, right, instead of praying to God. So he talks about where that tradition comes from. He takes a deep look at Christmas, Easter, Valentine's Day. He looks at the feasts and the appointed times. And I honestly, I'm only halfway through. I'm not even quite all the way done, but it's been a convicting book. It's been challenging for me, and not in a bad way, but I think I've been sucked into a lot of traditions that the church is very involved in and active in and supportive in. It's not a terrible thing, right? However, we've done it at the exclusion of celebrating the feast. And even he really, and this, I'm going to just be real honest, my biggest conviction lately has been not honoring Shabbat the way that I should, and the Sabbath, and Saturdays. So, I've really like, I think I need to approach this a little bit different. He also puts in a challenge too, and he's not the first person I have read this line of thought. I've really been, especially in studying Revelation, you know, when we get to the millennial kingdom or the new heaven and new earth, you know, there's a lot of indication that it's going to be Jewish, right?
The Torah will be the law of the land.
And so if we are not familiar with the practices of Torah, it's going to be a difficult transition for Christians to begin to understand this. And I think also, you know, some of us have been giving exposure to this earlier, and some of us are teachers. And I think, you know, we may very well be the ones that are called on to help with that transition, you know, because we've kind of got both feet feet in both worlds, where we can help some of the Christians that have absolutely refused to even look at Torah and some of the understandings of, you know, Shabbat and the feasts. And, you know, I certainly don't want to be the one that's left behind, literally, but also what a sad day when you realize I've missed a lot of practicing my faith through the lens of Torah and understanding the Hebraic understanding of our faith. So, so I do enjoy this. He's definitely challenged me in a lot of it. Although what I have found is, again, I'm a nerd and I enjoy looking at the references. So when he makes a statement about something, I want to know, like, oh, where did he get that? I want to read more about it. And when I do that, I'm finding a lot of online articles, Wikipedia articles, which I'm a teacher, and I, you know, teach my kids how to do research papers, and I don't even allow Wikipedia articles. Like, I use Wikipedia as the jump off. Like, if they have sourced it, then I'll go to the source. And so I like to look for primary documents, and I like to look for, you know, first uses of things. And so when I did a little bit of a deep dive into some of his research, I had a few challenges, like, I think I want to kind of keep looking a little deeper and kind of follow up on some of his ideas. So good book. I'm enjoying it. I'm learning a lot, you know, but it's a jumping off place for me to continue digging a little bit deeper. So, yeah.
And if you check out, we had Rabbi Daryl Weinberg on our program. So you can go back in some of the, on both of our websites.
He talked about his book. Yeah.
So on our Facebook, we both aired this program on Facebook, and you can go back through some of the other programs and find him. So yeah, very good. There was something I was going to say about that. Let me think. I think that, I had another guy on my podcast once. His name was Michael Minstrada, and he lives in Israel with his Messianic wife, and he is CEO over, like, you know, CEO, I guess, over all these different ministries that bless Israel. So my point is that he was raised in church and everything else, but he said something on the show that stayed with me, and that was, people don't realize that when we go to heaven, we're going to be with the Jewish king for eternity. And throughout the Messianic kingdom and then eternity, he will always be a Jewish king, a Messianic king. And so we're not going to get away from Judaism in heaven. We're not going to get, or I shouldn't even say Judaism, because it only became Judaism after Babylon. But the whole doctrine, whatever, the whole thing that the Father set up for them through Moses is the true, you know, is the foundation, but we're not going to get rid of it. We're not going to escape it, and we're going to be following it. And, so
might be important.
And I don't think we realize that.
Exactly. It might be important to know a few things.
He even said, he goes, I think there's going to be a lot of surprised people in heaven when they see a Jewish king.
I was even thinking he was, I don't know if it was this one or another book recently, but you know, in church, you always hear, like, I can't wait to have my new body. I'm going to eat anything I want and I'll never get fat. And I mean, I've heard jokes about that in church. and we're going to be resurrected in the same body that we have. Yes, it's glorified, but it's still a body that cannot eat everything it wants. It's going to be Torah observant. So
yes, it is, and we don't realize that, and that's why. That's why my husband and I have chosen just to start being Torah observant now, because we want to be fully prepared, but we also want to understand better. And it's not misplacing grace. I think that's the biggest argument you hear from every Christian. Well, what about grace? And when Jesus says he fulfilled it, it doesn't mean that he fulfilled it and now it's all done. He said that he came to teach the law and the prophets. He came to show us what it means to follow the Torah. And when it talks about even he is the word, he is the Torah. So he didn't change anything. And so there's a lot of, sometimes there can be some bad doctrine going on, and we've chosen to not agree, not even to read some books of the Bible. And how can that be good when we've just totally said, no, we don't have to read that book. No, we don't have to read that book. Or no, we don't have to do that. That's scary.
It is.
But anyway, that's a whole nother show.
We've done that show.
We have.
All right, what you got, Stephanie?
Okay, this one's my last one, but it's also my favorite. And so it's called The Epic of Eden, and I know I've held it up here before, but this is Sandra L. Richter is a PhD from Harvard University, and she is a professor of biblical studies at Westmont College. And she's also been at Asbury Theological Seminary. But awesome book. There were only 2 things that I didn't agree with in the whole book, and those weren't a make it or break it type of thing. But, we always have that, right? Where it's like, oh, no, I don't agree with that. But it doesn't take away from every other good thing that she taught. And that's why I still love it. She goes from Adam and Eve to the Messiah. And she talks about the circle of life, so to speak. We began with the garden in Eden, and we end with the garden in Eden. And they were the same mountaintop both times. Yeah. And so it's amazing. And she goes through covenant and how the covenant began in a perfect world, and how it re-began in a fallen world. And you go through, and she explains the covenant with Adam and Eve, the covenant with Noah, the covenant with Abraham, Moses, David, and of course Messiah. And she gives you background, she gives you maps, so you see different maps in here, and she gives you tables, which I'm, of course, that's why Lauren and I do this show together, and that's why we get along, because we're so total nerds and such, like, we love maps and we love tables, and but she gives you little figures of how the house looked at that time, and how they would have had a shared area and where their animals would have been. So that helps you understand the whole manger thing in the Christmas story. But she also talked about, this was interesting, she in the center, and you can just see maybe the circles, but in the center is the patriarch, which would have been someone like Abraham or any patriarch of any family. And then it went out to clan, and then it went out to tribe, and then nation. So those were how it was laid out. So patriarch was in the center, and then that patriarch was part of a clan, and that patriarch was part of a tribe, and then ultimately part of a nation. And that is how the family was run, and then how that spread out through the community and the whole society. So she explains what a patriarch is, and why it's important to understand, because without that understanding of a patriarch, we miss out on some of the things that the Bible talks about so often, with Abraham, with all of those men, Isaac, Jacob. So here's a few comments. So Lori said, yep, I held it up before. I keep saying that, don't I? When I like something, I repeat myself quite often. But yes, we work together. So we work well together, because we're friends off camera too. So, and then
I have that book. I have. We were talking to be reads. So
yeah, well, you have some books that I haven't read yet either. But then she gives you this, so you know exactly. So it starts up here with Eden, and then this is Jerusalem. So it's just a great book. I would highly recommend it. I read it every night before I went to bed, and sometimes I got to bed late because I read too long. So this is one of those books that just sat by my bed, and I read it every night until I was finished. I think it only took me like a week or maybe 10 days because I just kept at it. So
that's good. Very good.
So,
all right. I think we have a little bit of time for one or two more, but this one I brought in, this is called Numbers in Scripture, Supernatural Design to Spiritual Significance. And this is an old book. This is actually a reprint. I mentioned talking to Stephanie earlier. I mean, the original copyright date was like 1913. So it's an old book, but I keep it as a reference. I can't tell you how many times I pull this book out to look at things, but what it does, the reason it is evergreen, like it's not theology or doctrine or an idea that has to be updated later. But what he does, it's E.W. Bullinger. He goes through every number used in the Bible. So, we've always heard that 7 is a number of completion, or 12 or 10 is a number of divinity. And, I grew up in the church. I would just hear that all the time, and nobody ever really explained why. And so he explains why. He looks at the first time a number is used in the Bible. He'll look at, because first time is always important when you're interpreting things. He'll go, if you want to talk about number 8, he'll go and give you every passage and every example of why, when and where 8 is used in the Bible. He'll give you examples of 8 things, like every time 8 is, 8 people survived the ark, 8 people did this. And so he gives you all of that information. But the reason I like it, he'll give you numbers, like certain words, like this word is in the Bible 8 times or only 1 time. He has a whole section of Bibles that are only used in the word, or words that are only used in the Bible 1 time. And why? Like, why is that important? So this is why I like it so much. So he goes through, and it's not a lot of gematria. Like, he doesn't go into like this word is equals to this number. That's not what he's talking about in the word, in the book. But like, here's an example. I want to read about number 8, because I think, and if you'll humor me, I should have had this pulled out. But the reason 8 represents renewal and regrowth. Number 1, because of the number of people that were in the ark, and the 8th day, you have 7 days of creation. Then the 8th day generally starts the next cycle.
Right. After the 7th. After the.
But what we don't understand too is that 8 is often a number that represents grace. And I'm almost there. I found number 7. So, and the reason we get that is the way it's used, the way 8 is used in the Bible, and the way the references, the items that it relates to, fishes and loaves even. I mean, he even goes into that to talk about, it's the number 8. It means to make fat or to cover with, to superabound. So you've got that idea of like the fulfillment of 7, but then 8 is like the superabound. It represents covenant. It represents, so you incorporate not only what 7 means, but then what 1 means, so it includes all of that as well. It's just a great reference. 8 by itself is associated with regeneration, new beginnings, new order. And so isn't that what
new beginnings is? That's how I've always heard it. Yeah.
Right. So then you understand that link to grace and resurrection. It represents resurrection. And
because technically Jesus resurrected on the 8th day. He resurrected after Shabbat.
Right.
And back in Leviticus, it was either chapter 8, 9, 10, somewhere in there. But once they anointed Aaron and his sons, they had to be put away for 7 days. Like they stayed in a tent for 7 days. They came out on the 8th day, and on the 8th day, the Spirit of the Lord or God entered the temple. So a lot of things happened on that 8th day.
Right. I mean, he even gives you stuff like David was the 8th son of Jesse.
Right.
The Lord Jesus was on a mountain 8 times in the Bible. There's just all.
That's interesting.
He's just got, it's just pages and pages of how these numbers are used in the Bible. And it's fascinating. Yeah, it's just fascinating. So I definitely hang on to this, and I look at it over and over again, to make sure I understand things. There's 8 references to the Old Testament in the book of Revelation. So, I mean, just, there's not coincidences. There's a very specific purpose to why things are done. Whenever you combine the numbers 8 and 13 together, what happens? It's just the lines of Cain, the lines of Seth, the 8th generation, what happened in every 8th generation. So, I mean, and that's just one letter, or I'm sorry, one number. So he goes through, and he goes all the way up to, I don't even know what the last, it's past 40, 70, 120. It looks like the last number might be 122.
Wow.
Yeah, so that might be the last.
So Marlene had a question. Nope. I had not heard of this. But...
Yeah, 666 would be the last number.
Oh, really? Okay. Yeah. Well, that makes sense because that's in Revelation. So
yeah. So what you got, Marlene?
I've not heard of the figures of speech, but I didn't hear
I haven't. No, but that to me seems very interesting because that's important,
Yeah.
To understand. I'm going to
look up his name and see which other book he has. There it is. The green copy. It's a green book. Sorry, go ahead.
A green copy, a green book?
Yeah, it's just green as opposed to that one being all red.
Right. Yeah.
Oh, guess what? It says I already own this item.
That's funny.
Yeah, that's Facebook or
Amazon keeping track of you.
You already ordered it. Stop ordering.
That's funny. Yeah, E.W. Bullinger, I mean, he's from the turn of the century, so it's old. These are old books, and some of them may not even be in reprint, but good stuff. I highly recommend it. I don't think you're going to go wrong picking this up as a reference because you'll use it over and over again. Yeah. It's very exhaustive. He's done a good job. Yeah. So I think that's it. The only other book I brought on it. Do you have another one, Stephanie?
I didn't. Nope, I didn't have one.
Okay. Yeah, this one is Gail Heaton. She actually has another. She had a show here on Lamb Network. I think she's on hiatus right now because she's in the process of writing these books. But she goes through the various Torah portions, and not all of them, but just adds just nuggets of information, all cultural, all historical, architect she looks at, archaeology she looks at. And so I've enjoyed her perspective of this. Just in the first book that she's written, she says things. I've often heard that it's hard to support Israel because they acted like colonizers and came in and took over the land and stole it from the Palestinians that were there first. And so she kind of talks a lot about Abraham because he was in the land at that time, early, and how he bought a grave and he bought land to bury his relatives, to bury Sarah. And in doing so, he has ownership and title to that land, so that when the Israelites came into the promised land, it's not that they were taking over land. They were entering into their heritage. They were entering to the land of the patriarchs that was owned 400 years prior, and it was his. And so I just think there's interesting things. And he even she gives you word studies, like there's a story how Abraham planted a tamask tree, and she gives a whole devotion on what that tree means and how long it takes that tree to grow and what that tree offered his descendants 400 years later. So it's a really interesting, very easy to read, nothing incredibly deep. It's just a great challenge to really take a different perspective of the Old Testament as we're reading it. So a tamask, Tamsk tree, I think is how you spell it, Lori.
Okay. I thought of one thing, but it's not something. It's because I know we're doing books, but this was some things I found on. I went to see the movie Patterns of Evidence, and then they have one for Exodus, for Moses, for Mount Sinai, and even whether or not Moses actually wrote the Torah, and whether the Exodus happened and when it happened. Great movies. And if you have streaming things, you can find some of them for free. I have found most of them for free, except for the ones that are just out. So that's my little additive there, because it is excellent. And I'll just put that link to Amazon. This is one of the films. This one is on Exodus, but oh my goodness, I'm not even going to try and talk about these because we will go way late, but just take my word for it. They are stuff you want to watch.
Well, I think we have come to the end today. So just as a reminder, please check out the Messianic Lamb Network. There are lots of other shows. And of course, there's always a prayer time that you're welcome to submit any different prayer requests that we have. And also keep track with us over the summer. We are going to be transitioning into a new study, but also I think we're going to be transitioning into a new day and time. And so we don't have that solidified yet. I have to go back to work, y'all. So we're going to be moving this probably to a later afternoon or early evening show. So with that, we thank you.
But it'll still be on our Facebook pages, and you can still watch it whenever you want.
And it'll still be called Living Waters. So we'll definitely get into that. So thank you for joining us. Again, any comments or additional information, please go ahead and continue to post. We always check our Facebook pages and respond to those things. But you guys, thank you for being with us today. And I'll go ahead and I'll roll us out.
Maybe you can answer that.
We are richly blessed to bring you what we believe is the fullest, most diverse, yet up-to-date progressive teachings, discussion, and prayer programming you can find anywhere on this planet. Be sure to take the tour of the MessianicLambRadio.com website. I'm Susan Hugie, thanking you for joining us on the Messianic Lamb Video Network.